Michael Bay produced these films, and in a lot of people's eyes, he ruined something that could have been great. In this version of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, they are all science experiments. They're all born in a lab, including Splinter, who is also a lab rat. Now, in this version, April's father works in the lab also. He's one of the scientists, and April is responsible for naming the turtles in this movie. Splinter and the turtles are also mutated in the lab. A fire breaks loose in the lab, but luckily April saves Splinter and the turtles, and they find their way outside into the street, where April lets them go, and they find their way into the sewers, where they mutate further and grow into the Ninja Turtles that we know. Well, I say that, they're not exactly like we know. This version is a little bit different. Years later, the Foot Clan and the Shredder start terrorising New York City, and the Turtles decide to rise to street level to fight the crime, and then they once again meet the girl who named them all, April. Now, if you've been listening to the previous episodes, you'll know that even some of the worst Ninja Turtle films that we've had, I've tried to show a bit of positivity in it as well, and try and talk about some of the good things that I enjoyed about it. But this film was a little bit more trickier for me. It just had too many elements that I weren't really happy with. So here's a few things that I dislike about the movie. The turtles are far too big. They are like hulking monsters. I mean, there are a few scenes where they just smash into the side of cars and tip the cars over. They're that strong. They now also seem to be bulletproof. I had a massive problem with this. The design looks a little bit ridiculous also. They have been given turtle nostrils, and I can appreciate that they were going for realism when designing the turtles, but it just doesn't look right. Also, Splinter's design looks really strange, and for some reason he constantly looks wet. That's the best way I can describe it. He looks wet. And then we have Shredder in this movie. It was like a huge transformer, one of the robots out of Michael Bay's other films. I mean, Shredder's technically in a big mech suit. I mean, I suppose he's got to pose some kind of threat to the Ninja Turtles, seeing as they're designed as these big hulking creatures now, but I just didn't like this design. And then there's the source material, the comic books. They just seem to be completely disposed of. It gives no personal vendetta between Shredder and the Splinter and Turtles. And the actual story that they come up with, the vendetta between the Turtles and Shredder, just seems really forced and out of place, like it had no place in this movie. Megan Fox as April, that's all I've got to say about that. And then we have the way that the Turtles learn ninjutsu. Splinter teaches the Turtles ninjutsu by finding a self-teaching book in the sewers, and they all become martial arts masters. Absolutely terrible. Absolute terrible film, terrible plot. Everything about it is just awful. The Foot Clan in this movie show no martial arts training whatsoever. They actually just use machine guns. They're more like soldiers. And when the Turtles actually start to fight the Foot Clan, there doesn't feel like there's any real threat or any challenge. You know that the Ninja Turtles are not going to have a problem getting these foot soldiers down, seeing as they're twice the size of them and twice the size in width, and they're bulletproof. But then if you cast your minds back to my favourite movie, the original 1990 Jim Henson Ninja Turtles, at least you felt there was some danger for the Turtles. I mean, Raphael got the snot kicked out of him by the Foot in that movie. You felt like there was some kind of threat, some kind of challenge whenever they went up against the Foot Clan. And I've got to say, as bad as the Michael Bay movies were, I must be grateful that we didn't get the initial script for this, an early draft. And in this script, the Turtles were meant to be aliens from Dimension X. So I'm just so glad they didn't go with that, because it would have made this film, which is already awful, 10 times worse. Karai also appears in this movie, but poses no threat whatsoever. And she's also given absolutely no backstory. She's got no character whatsoever. She's just there. And like I said, I've got nothing nice to say about this film. I'm sorry, I just haven't. I mean, after waiting so long to get a live action version of the Ninja Turtles, I mean, we've been waiting since the 1990s, and then we get this trash, in my opinion. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Out of the Shadows movie. And also this movie was a continuation of the last one, and also it did have the same designs, the same actors, the same feel to it. I must admit, I did enjoy this one slightly more than the first one. And here's the reasons why. Now, before I go on, I'm not saying that this movie was a good movie. It wasn't, but I can appreciate what they were trying to do with this one. In this movie, they tried something they hadn't done before, and that was to blend in the 87 cartoon with this live action movie, giving us at long last a live action CGI version of Bebop and Rocksteady. And they actually look pretty good. They don't look great, but they look pretty good, and it was nice to actually see Bebop and Rocksteady on the big screen at last. And even though I hated the first one, this was enough to draw me in to go and watch the second one at the cinema. We also got Krang and the Technodrome. And Baxter Stockman was also introduced Space Moore in his original comic book design. And I've got to say, he reminded me a lot of Neil deGrasse Tyson for some reason. I'm not sure if anyone else thought that, but I always think that when I see this movie, I always think it just reminds me of Neil deGrasse Tyson, and I wonder whether that was intentional. Now, here's the bad points I have to mention about this film. We did get the great fan service of the 1987 cartoon mixed in with it, but it wasn't enough for me to stop this movie being bad. Instead of attempting to make Shredder a more interesting character than we got in the last movie, he is now simply reduced to a side character who works for Krang. And even at one point in the movie, Krang freezes him and imprisons him, and that's it. We don't see him again. He isn't in the end of the movie. There's no big fight with Shredder. When we do see him, he's merely a character shouting orders to his henchmen. And then we get on to Casey Jones, who is also in this movie, and other characters from the comics and the TV show. In this movie, he is played by Arrow star Stephen Amell. Now, when I first heard this news, I thought, oh great, he's a fantastic Green Arrow. I like him in Green Arrow, he's brilliant. Unfortunately, I found him to be another letdown. Casey Jones is a crime-fighting vigilante, but in this movie, they make him a corrections officer who wants to be promoted to a police officer, and he only wears a hockey mask in his spare time. Also, they just make him a cheesy as hell in this version, not at all like the source material. And then once again you have the Ninja Turtles, who are once again big hulking monsters who are bulletproof. All that being said, there were some quite enjoyable scenes, especially the ones with the 87 classic characters like Bebop and Rocksteady and Krang, who was very grotesque in this. He had his big mech suit like he did in the cartoon. It looked very different in this, which was probably a good thing, to be honest, compared to the 87 cartoon. And Krang, he did look quite good actually. He looked disgusting and he looked gooey and slimy, but that's how I imagine a alien brain would look. But I did actually enjoy the 1987 elements of this film where they introduced those characters. It's just everything else that went with it just made this film bad again, just like the first one. But before we move on from the Michael Bay movies, I've just got a bit of trivia for you. There is a deleted scene featuring Judith Hogue, the original April O'Neil, playing April's boss. It's a shame that they didn't get this scene into the movie, but it is nice to see it anyway. And apparently there were minor tweaks made to the actual Ninja Turtle design in this movie to make them look a little bit more like the 1987 cartoon by making them a lighter green and changing a few other aspects of their designs here and there. But to be honest, they still look far too big and they look nothing like the 1987 series, nothing at all. Apparently in the scene where Krang freezes Shredder and imprisons him, as Shredder is being put into storage on the Technodrome, you can actually see a frozen Triceraton and a neutrino, both of these characters out of the comic books and the cartoon, so that was another bit of great fan service that they gave us. There's also a moment in the film where you hear the 1987 theme tune as the Ninja Turtles sound the horn on the Turtle Wagon. So, like I said, with the inclusion of Bebop and Rocksteady, with the inclusion of Krang, Technodrome, Dimension X, and with these little Easter eggs here and there, with Judith Hogue being introduced, with the Ninja Turtles theme tune from the 1987 cartoon, it would seem that this time round they were trying to please the fans. And, I have said a few negative things about this movie, but truth be told, I did enjoy this one for pure nostalgic reasons. It's nice to eventually see the appearance of some of the 1987 cartoon characters, which made this one of my guilty pleasures. It's not a great film, but I did enjoy it in a weird way, if that makes sense.